My name is Amelia Hart, and on my 34th birthday, everything I believed about family, loyalty, and love collapsed in slow motion. For months, I lived inside that day. I mapped it, scheduled it, polished every detail until it shone. I wanted a night that proved the life I had built was not a fluke. I wanted them to see me as I saw myself, capable, steady, deserving. I booked the private dining room at Betrayal, the city's most whispered about restaurant. I ordered champagne. I rehearsed the small toasts I'd say. I bought a dress. It wasn't the most expensive thing I'd ever bought, but it was the most I'd ever allowed myself to spend on a single piece of clothing. A cream silk sheath from a boutique I'd admired, beading along the neckline that caught the light like tiny promises. The saleswoman wrapped it with a smile as if she knew the woman who would wear it. I tried it on at home, stood in front of the mirror, and remembered every late night, every missed weekend, every overtime email that made this life possible. I wrote the date in my head like an index final. Today, proof. My family has always been my complicated math problem. My older sister Claire chose a different rhythm. At 20 she had a child, May, and the path that followed was uneven and uncertain. Jobs that never stuck, apartments that changed seasons like weather, lovers who promised their turn at responsibility and never paid rent. Our mother, Evelyn, made a life of smoothing the rough edges. She celebrated Claire's efforts with the tenderness that forgave every relapse. I learned early to carry weight. They called me the responsible one. That label stuck. I left our small town, moved to Chicago, and carved a life from the stubbornness of an only child who wanted more than survival. I started as a marketing coordinator and kept my head down, kept my hand up, until promotions followed. My apartment overlooks the blue strip of Lake Michigan. My closet is edited down to pieces that fit the life I intended to lead. I bought a car after my last promotion, a sensible sedan that never screamed wealth but whispered safety. Claire's calls began as needs and became routines. Nat, the landlord's being difficult. Can you help just this once? My car won't start. Can you wire me some? May needs to get to dance class. Can you cover gas? At first I did it because family does that. Then just this once became month. The credit card I added Claire to for true emergencies turned out to be a VIP pass to indulgences she could not afford. Restaurant nights, salon trips, weekend getaways. I paid the bills, because my internal rulebook said you don't leave family to drown. When May turned 16 and asked for a car, it felt like the right thing. I bought a reliable sedan, insured it in my name. Easier and cheaper, told her to use it until school ended. Use, not own, I said out loud once, sticky with justification. Everyone nodded. I took the extra work and the extra worry like a professional. I never realized that use would mutate into entitlement until it was too late. Evelyn always had a way of softening my edges in public. When I came home from college with scholarship letters, she praised my luck. When I landed a decent job, she said, "Maybe don't work too hard, sweetheart." When I told her about promotions, she turned the conversation to Claire's latest heartbreak, the small kindness Claire had given a stranger, or how much Claire had tried. My successes were background music. Claire's slights were always the headline. For decades I expected their eyes to adjust, to finally look at me the way my friends did, like I mattered for reasons beyond the fact that I balanced their checkbook. This year felt different because I wanted it to. I invited a few close friends. Lena, my roommate from college, who is now a pediatrician. Priya, my longtime colleague. Marcus and Tom, the couple who live across the hall. They all accepted with enthusiastic messages that landed warm in my inbox. I called my mother and invited her with a practiced optimism. "It's in the city on a Thursday, but I can send a car." Her sigh on the phone was the same as always. She would try. Claire's voice was a sketch of indifference. "We'll be there, but May's got rehearsal." And when I offered to send money for May's outfit, Claire snipped. "That would be the least you could do." On the morning of the dinner I woke up early and prepped like a ceremony. Facial, massage, hair that fell in waves that didn't fight the restaurant line. I sipped coffee, staring at the dress hanging like a promise. Tonight, I told myself, Tonight they will see me without the usual frames of judgment. Tonight my life will be undeniable. Betrayal greeted me like the stage it was. The host called my name and handed me a chilled glass of champagne. My friends arrived early, their laughter an easy tide that smoothed my nerves. We settled into the private room, candles low, menus folded like offerings. I checked my phone as if expecting a message. 1,000 tiny anxieties flicked. At 7:45 they came in, Evelyn, Claire, May, arriving in that familiar collage of excuses and entitlement. Evelyn in her usual I did what I could dress, Claire looking tired and irritated, May scrolling with the bored-polished cruelty of a teenager who knows how to make an entrance. They slid into the seats like they belonged somewhere else. Conversation was polite and stilted at first. My friends asked about dance, about work, about small joys. Claire answered in monosyllables and deflections. Evelyn spoke in comforting little lies about how hard Claire tried. I offered to look into summer intensives for May. I suggested scholarships, city programs, options that could mean more than a hobby. Claire snapped in a way that made the room drop into a quiet that burned. Not everyone can afford your Chicago life, she said like she had discovered a fact no one else had considered. If the evening had held an invisible scale, that crack of Claire's tone tipped it. My friends' faces showed the same small shock I felt. Marcus tightened his jaw. Lena placed a hand over mine under the table and squeezed. We navigated courses and forced smiles. The toasts were lovely. My friends' words landed like steady beams. Amelia, your kindness and grit, your steadiness. Then my mother's toast, gentle and flat. Happy birthday, sweetheart. 34 already. Claire's toast was an eye roll disguised as a sentiment. May didn't bother with a toast at all. Gifts came next, thoughtful personal things from my friends, a leather portfolio from Lena embossed with my initials, a spa weekend from Marcus and Tom. These were gestures, pulled from seeing me, my work, my rest, my real life. I opened them with gratitude. Then, Claire handed me a small bag. Inside, a candle in clearance wrapping in a ripped card that read, Happy birthday, sis. For a moment I tried to fold the hurt into a polite laugh. Claire shrugged and said, Not everyone can buy fancy gifts. We moved into dessert, the showy kind restaurants bring out, a sculpture of chocolate and sugar, sparklers and shimmering gold leaf, spelling my name. For an instant, the room hummed with admiration. I allowed myself a small swell of pride. That is the life I built. That is the surface I polished with long hours. Then I saw May's face, a storm of calculation that made my stomach drop. She leaned across the table and whispered to Claire. Claire smirked and passed the whisper like a baton to Evelyn. The three of them angled their faces like conspirators. I offered an olive branch because habit and hope live together. I'm glad you're here, May, I said. I know weeknights are hard. She looked up, pupils steady, and said in the kind of voice no one grows into gracefully, Must be nice to throw money around while people are starving. Claire made a thin show of cutting her off. Be nice, it's her aunt's birthday. The room had, until then, carried a polite aggregate of laughter and small talk. It stopped. Then, May stood, grabbed her cranberry mocktail, sparkling and red, and like the moment was a bead sliding down a string, she hurled the glass straight at me. The liquid hit my chest and face with ice-cold, humiliating clarity. It soaked into the silk, turning the cream into scarlet. The private room inhaled, the sparklers glow and the candlelight reflected off the beadwork on my dress. But the shimmer dissolved under the stain. May's voice, thin as betrayal, cut the air. Now you look as cheap as you really are. People gasped. Marcus sprang, as if motion could undo what had been done. I stopped him with one hand, baffled by my own calm. The waiter hovered, eyes across the restaurant burned like witness light. My mother reached forward and patted May's hand, a touch that wrapped smugness in a mother's acceptance. She rose, voice soft with the practiced disappointment. But the protector, who knows how to turn blame inward. We should go, she said to the room. This is too much for a girl. Claire gathered her purse. They left amid my friends' stunned murmurs. I sat with the cold wetness seeping into silk and dignity. I smiled for them as they shepherded me to the door. I smiled through the shock because I had learned to be the neat caretaker in messy scenes. We left the restaurant with heads turned and whispers like paper wings. In my apartment, I undressed in the bathroom, standing under hot water while cranberry rinsed from my hair. The dress hung in the bathtub, a stain that felt like a verdict. I scrolled my phone and found a smear of that verdict online. May's post, a blurry photo of me with the dress, captioned with cruelty, and a chorus of laughing emojis. Claire had liked it. That night something inside me changed. It did not happen all at once. It was more like a fault line shifting, a small subterranean movement that means the shape of the earth will never be the same again. I texted 2 numbers, my bank and my lawyer. I slept for the first time in years with a pocket of dread where family drama usually lives. Morning arrives in numbers. I logged into accounts, downloaded statements, scanned receipts. 5 years of habit had become a financial river that ran from my checking account into there. The credit card I'd let Claire use for emergencies showed dinner nights, boutique tags, spa treatments, luxuries, not lifelines. The car, which I had bought for May, appeared on the purchase agreement in my name. I had paid insurance, registration, maintenance, gas money. I had been generous because family was supposed to be a weather shelter. I had been generous until generosity became a roof that masked dependency. I called the card company at 8 sharp, listening to the sterile politeness of the agent as if it were a bomb. I need to remove an authorized user, I said. They asked why. Misuse of the card for personal expenses, I said. The agent handled it within minutes, the new card on its way, the drain closed. I felt something akin to relief, sharp, clean relief, like the first clean cut after years of bandaged compromises. Next I called Thomas, a friend who practiced property law. His voice was warm and direct. If the title and registration are in your name, you can reclaim. Use is not ownership. Call a towing service. Provide documentation. Be careful with confrontation, but you're on solid ground. I sent the towing company the registration and insurance scans and scheduled pickup. They promised discretion. I felt a new kind of power arranging for the vehicle's removal. Not cruel, I told myself. Responsible. Necessary. Then I called Janet, my financial advisor. We ran the numbers like doctors reading test results. The funds you've poured into family support, she said, added up to a substantial diversion. If we reallocate, you can accelerate your retirement timeline by years. You can do more for yourself, and you'll actually have more to give when support is meaningful and not habitual. Enabling. Documentation matters. Printed bank transfers, receipts, screenshots of May's mocking post. I made a tidy packet, not to punish, but to make the truth undeniable. When someone's life is a pattern of small cruelties, you sometimes need the bluntness of spreadsheets to illustrate what words will not. They texted immediately when the card declined. Claire's messages moved from confusion to rage. Are you seriously doing this on your birthday? She wrote. You could have called. May's voice on the phone, fragile, then venomous, wavered between excuse and accusation. You can't take the car, she said. I need it for darts. I stayed steady. It is mine, I said. I can reclaim my property if I choose. By noon the towing company called to say they had secured the vehicle. The driver confessed that a young woman had tried to stop them, calling me a thief. I tipped extra because discretion and competence cost money and because I was tired of the theater of guilt that had always been performed for me. At 3 I texted my mother, Claire and May, come to my apartment at 3, we need to talk. The timing felt purposeful, not a surprise ambush, but a formal invitation to face the ledger and the wounds. I laid out the documents across my dining table, the raw clarity of numbers and screenshots like an X-ray of what had been happening beneath polite smile. They came like they always had, Claire storming in with that mixture of entitlement and resentment, May with her near-teen bravado failing into anxiousness, Evelyn fluttering around like a stage manager of heartbreak. I asked them to sit. I explained without theatricality. I slid a folder forward and pointed at the totals. Transfers over the last 5 years, $47,632. Claire's credit card charges included clothing boutiques, concerts and dinners, $3,418 billed as emergency spending. The car, $32,000 for purchase, plus ongoing thousands for insurance and maintenance expenses I underwrote without complaint. They reacted as if the numbers were heavy stones flung into still water. Claire's face faltered into disbelief. May's mockery shrank to an uncomfortable flush. Evelyn's practiced defensiveness slipped for a beat. She looked as if seeing the amounts in print forced a reordering of facts she had long compressed into story. Then, I put my phone on the table and opened May's feeds, the photos clipped, the videos from the restaurant where she had filmed me without my knowledge, the mocking captions, the comments. "Why would you humiliate me and then post it?" I asked. May muttered. "It was a joke." Jokes have to land on everyone to be jokes. This had aimed to wound. Claire tried to deflect. "We didn't mean it like that. It's not that serious, but intent cannot cancel impact." For years I had folded myself into the shape of the family's needs, until my edges blurred. I had paid for Claire to get by when she could have applied the effort to get up. I had offered May the car and that offering became an expectation. My mother had learned to comfort the wounded while excusing the wounder. The pattern reproduced itself like an old photo. I told them my boundaries. I had closed the credit account. I had arranged for the car to be returned to my possession. The college fund I'd quietly set aside for May remained intact, housed in a trust for education, and to be used when she enrolled in higher education. I'd never mentioned it because I'd hoped it could be a gift when the time was right, not a bargaining chip. For everything else, the automatic transfers stopped. Claire's panic rose like a tide. "The rent is due," she said. "May needs shoes. We'll starve." I didn't scoff. I offered practical counsel. Find a roommate, take a second job, budget for dance if you must. There are community resources. There are choices. It was a bitter menu, but it was a real one. For a while the room spun with every tactic they'd used on me my whole life. Guilt, outrage, tears. This time, they were ineffective. I had the receipts. I had the legal advice. I had set a perimeter I would not allow them to cross. I did not want to be cruel, but I could not continue to be the provider of a pattern that worked only because I allowed it. They left into the afternoon air like people stepping out of a line I'd drawn. When Eve passed the doorway she whispered, "I never meant to hurt you." Words matter, but they are the work of a first. I closed the door and sat down in the new quiet, the minerals of a different life settling. That night, the texts slowed. There were bristling accusations, and then the silence that feels like a held breath. I took time to breathe. I called Janet, who had run a projection that made the implications of my choices plain. If I stopped supporting them in this way, I could move financial milestones forward, could consider long-deferred dreams, travel, investments, a quieter life. It felt less like cruelty than choosing myself. The first week was the hardest. My phone vibrated with pleas and insults, sometimes within the same minute. Claire alternated between fury and frantic pleading. Evelyn oscillated between hurt and the old petitions to save her child. May messages moved from blame to apology and back to demand. I responded with clarity and limits. I won't restore the card. I will not reinstate automatic payments. The car is mine to reclaim and to decide how to use. They tried to make me crack by spreading stories. Friends and acquaintances heard one version of the fight and watched my phone like a scoreboard. But the ridicule and whispering were dull knives against a new kind of armor, the knowledge that my choice was neither vengeful nor impulsive. It was precise, necessary, and legal. Then came the first sign of something shifting. A text from May. "I got a job at the mall, saving for a car, not asking for money. Just wanted you to know." Such a small sentence, but it landed like the first green leaf after fire. I answered with an honest, "I'm proud of you." I meant it. That message had the softness of a repair starting at the roots. Claire's change came slower. Weeks spun and she found a position as an office manager that fit her experience and began to manage rent herself. Her messages to me moved from entitlement to responsibility. She contacted me months later with a message neither apologetic nor triumphant. "Thank you for forcing me to stand on my own. I hated that it took this, but I needed the push." The message was admission disguised as a begrudging thank you. It was the sound of a habit unstitched. Evelyn was the hardest piece. We began with guarded weekly calls, neutral, concrete check-ins. She slipped, sometimes into old reflexes. "Are you sure you can't help this once?" And I would redirect. "Tell me about your week," I would say. She started to ask about me. "Are you dating anyone?" she asked once, and for the first time her curiosity was about who I might become, rather than what she had lost. Small questions coagulated into small changes. One evening she said with a voice that trembled with years, "I failed you as a mother. I favored Claire because she seemed to need more." Tears came to both our eyes. The confession was a small crack in a long wall, but it was a start. Reclaiming the car came with its own moral tangle. May had used it for everything: to practice, to hang with friends, to pose for social posts. When the towing company returned it to my garage, she felt bereft. She asked, in a real, trembling voice, if she could earn it back, perhaps by paying me or proving responsibility. I offered alternatives: save, take public transit, work for the money, prove that she could keep something without entitlement. She chose the dignity of labor. She worked evenings at the mall, paid her own bills, and built a small cushion for lessons and future independence. We began to test new ways of being. Family dinners shifted from symbolic high stakes to simpler things. Claire learned to bring a dish she could afford. Evelyn learned to keep her praise simple and centered on the present. The college fund I had set aside became a true option rather than a bargaining chip. When May asked if she could use the funds for community college, I said yes, provided she earned placement and applied honestly. Her gratitude was a relief that smelled faintly of redemption. There were setbacks. Old tendencies don't disappear overnight, but the baseline changed. If before we drifted into automatic expectations like grooves in a record, now we had to keep choosing differently. I learned to say no without my chest contracting. I learned to leave my money out of the family equation unless love was mutual and accountability was present. My life did not become richer only in dollar amounts. It filled in ways that money could not buy. I took a photography class I'd bookmarked for years. I filled the frames of my apartment with my own prints. I dated with the lighter heart of someone whose energy wasn't constantly siphoned. I took a 2-week trip to Italy because I could and because I wanted to see streets that belonged to no one else's past. I rediscovered that generosity is far sweeter when it's a choice, not a default. At 18 months, the coastline of our relationship looked different. Phone calls were less frantic. May called with updates about school applications, and I listened. Claire texted about a promotion she'd received at work and asked if I wanted to celebrate. Evelyn, when she called, asked about my work and, astonishingly, how my friends were doing. The shifts were imperfect. Sometimes forgiveness and resentment circled each other like migratory birds. But more often there were good meals and honest toasts. One autumn afternoon, at my mother's modest kitchen table, she stood to make a toast. She raised a glass of homemade lemonade and said, to my daughter Amelia, who had the courage to change the pattern, she loved us enough to stop saving us from ourselves. Her voice didn't tremble this time with the rehearsed sorrow of always apologizing for Claire's missteps. It held truth, and everyone at the table, Claire, May, me, felt the shape of it. Later, May approached me with a folded envelope. Inside was $200, a sum she had saved from her summer job. "I wanted to repay you for the car," she said, eyes bright with the awkwardness of someone learning accountability. I accepted the envelope because it mattered not for the amount but for the meaning. Responsibility, humility, the first private act of restitution. People sometimes ask me if it hurt to cut them off. Yes, it was sharp and lonely and full of second-guessing, but the pain was the breaking open of something that needed to be freed. Boundaries are surgical work. They hurt, but they save the rest of the body. The hardest part was choosing myself against the story I'd been told. For most of my life the narrative was clear: family first, always. But family unexamined becomes a habit that can stifle as much as it nourishes. I had to look at love not as a constant giving until nothing remains but eroded lip of a cliff, but as a mutual landscape where resources and care can flow back and forth without one person performing all safety. In the months that followed our confrontation, each small decision reinforced the new shape of our relationships. Claire became a different sister, less quick to take, more likely to ask for help in ways that required effort. Evelyn learned to admire me without folding my life into a comparison with Claire's. May learned a hard and useful truth: when you wield cruelty like a shield, you sharpen the hurt you intend for others. My friendships deepened because I was less available for dramas that drained me. Lena and Priya became my community of ordinary celebrations, sushi nights, photo walks, lazy weekend mornings where nobody needed bail money and conversation could stay light. Marcus and Tom became the kind of friends who showed up at small, honest places, not to fix but to witness. I also discovered the freedom of financial agency. I opened an account separate from the one I'd used to subsidize family. I met with Janet and made a plan to invest in things that mattered to me. For travel, for a future apartment that might be mine someday, for retirement that felt less like a distant cloud. The numbers on the screen changed my horizon. The more practical changes in my life, the photography classes, the Italian trip, the quiet weekends spent making dinner for friends, were small but real. They weren't then gifts given to someone else to pay a debt. They were the rewards of choosing a life that valued my own future. People sometimes frame this kind of choice as cold-hearted. It's not. It's painful and honest. I didn't stop loving Claire or May. I simply stopped confusing love with unending supply. There is a difference between charity and enabling. Charity has boundaries. Enabling removes responsibility. I learned to love by teaching responsibility. 6 months after the night at Betrayal, Claire called me. Her voice sounded different, clearer, steadier. "I'm moving into a place I can afford," she said. I actually signed a lease. It was not triumph so much as a report of change. I sent her cookware and a small welcome basket. It was a practical gift that said, "I see you trying." A year out, at my 35th birthday, I decided not to hide from what had happened. I invited the same small circle, friends and family, but this time, my mother cooked. There was a homemade chocolate cake, a slew of candles that were as much a laugh as ritual. Claire brought a modest gift and a note that said she was proud of the way I'd handled things. May gave me a tiny handmade card that looked like a child's drawing but with words that trembled. "Thank you for believing in me." I cried then, the kind of tears that are both soft and iron strong. If you're listening because you're trapped in a loop of giving that leaves you empty, know this: boundaries are not betrayal. They are prescriptions. They are the adult acts of love that say, "I will not drown for you anymore, but I will coach you to swim." It is a terrifying, vital choice. People will tell you that families are different, that your circumstances vary. That is true, but the pattern is common. Someone becomes the provider, someone becomes dependent, and the script repeats. If you are the one writing the checks and wiping the slates, ask yourself who benefits in the long run. Ask whether you are restoring dignity or cultivating dependency. When I look at the scar of that cranberry stain hanging in my memory, it no longer feels like shame. It feels like a kind of punctuation, an exclamation point that forced a new sentence to begin. I still love my family. I still make room for them. But our conversations are no longer exchanges of default favors. They require thought, effort, and humility. They require apologies that aren't transactional. If you've ever been humiliated by people you loved, if you've ever been taken for granted in 1,000 small ways, I hope my story gives you permission to name what has happened and to change it. It was the hardest thing I ever did, and also the most necessary. If this story reached you, please share your experiences. How did you set boundaries? What worked? What didn't? I read every message, and I know there are people out there sitting on the edge of the same decision, wondering if they can be both loving and firm. You can. You just have to start by believing you deserve the effort of your own care. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that saying no can sometimes be the deepest yes to yourself.